the newsagents.
Elon Musk has no social conscience or conscience whatsoever. I don't know, whatever Elon Musk is on, it says that that's okay to continue to air that is absolutely disgusting behaviour. And quite frankly, the bloke should be jailed.
That's Australia's independent legislator, Jackie Lambie, talking about Elon Musk. Her views on Elon Musk don't end there.
Yeah, like I've already said, I think he's a social media knob with no social conscience.
Yeah, a social media knob with no social conscience. At the heart of all of this is video that is available on X of the horrible stabbing that took place at a church in Sydney a week ago. And it raises a question that governments around the world are dealing with, but it's come into sharpest focus in Australia, about who is more powerful, the duly elected government of the day or an American tech billionaire? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis. And later in the podcast, we're going to be talking about small boats, legislation, the fact that it has now passed, but also another 5 deaths in the Channel overnight, including a small child.
We're going to come on to that. But first, we're going to start with Elon Musk, who's been called an arrogant billionaire by none other than Australia's Prime Minister. He's essentially clashed over this question of what should be allowed to stay on Twitter after that appalling stabbing that John was describing in a Sydney church, because a federal court in Sydney has granted what they're calling a temporary global ban. So it's not just in Australia that this applies, it is worldwide. After X, Twitter, Elon Musk's newly revamped site, has said it will challenge Australia's safety commissioner over questions of freedom of expression, which is his thing.
Yeah, and essentially this relates to particularly harrowing, violent images that people had recorded in the vicinity of that attack. And the Australian government are saying that they don't think that there is any need for that footage to be made public. They think it is disrespectful to the victims. They think it's disrespectful to the victims' families. And then you have Musk saying, on the other hand, in this kind of like Hobbesian view that he takes about information, this kind of sort of state of nature view, that he thinks that the internet should basically be relatively unregulated, anchoring it in freedom of expression. And his view is that the Australian government, if you allow a government to have a kind of global ban on something, then effectively you have no democratic accountability worldwide because they are policing the internet independently.
Because just to take you back a bit, this attack, which was on a guy called Mari Emmanuel, was pretty horrible. But Australia's position, Australia's government believes that social media posts like this are actually inflaming community tension. So they're not just saying nobody should see the aftermaths of an attack like this. They're saying when you start showing images like this, you are creating an atmosphere in which this kind of stuff or retaliation for this kind of stuff could happen again. And I think it's worth just explaining where Australia has stood on this, which is they have an Online Safety Act brought in about, 3 years ago, 2021, and they have been at the forefront of efforts to hold tech companies responsible for the content posted on their platforms. And I guess this is the biggest, arguably the biggest global question really about regulation, about how countries sort of work together or find a way to make global rules about things that naturally you would want to police or legislate on individually.
Yeah, and so as a result, this has intensified to the very highest levels of Australian politics, as we've been saying. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, it's not just this independent MP we've noted, he has criticised Musk and Twitter in particular in the strongest terms.
Well, this is a bloke who's chosen ego and showing violence over common sense. I think that Australians will shake their head when they think that this billionaire is prepared to go to court fighting for the right to sow division and to show violent videos which are very distressing. He is in social media, but he has a social responsibility in order to have that social licence And what has occurred here is that the E-Safety Commissioner has made very sensible suggestions. Other social media companies have complied without complaint. But this bloke thinks he's above the Australian law, that he's above common decency. And I tell you what, I say to Elon Musk that he is so out of touch with what the Australian public want. This has been a distressing time.
Albanese there saying that Musk doesn't care about Australian law. Well, yeah, absolutely. He doesn't. It's very, very clear. It's not entirely clear what law Musk cares about. If he does, it will probably only be US law because it's the one that causes him the greatest headaches. But I think, it's as Emily was saying, the key point with this is it's not just about the graphic imagery. The point is that this all goes back to the changed nature of Twitter in the Musk era, which, as we all know, over the last 10 years, Twitter became the go-to news source, particularly for real-time events like terror attacks, and people were getting their information in real time from it. And, you know, it wasn't always completely accurate, but when you had the blue tick system where you had verified users who represented independent, credible, authoritative news organizations, generally it wasn't usually wrong, or at least not profoundly so. Obviously, in the Musk era, that's completely changed. And this was a case in point. So when the Bondi Junction attack took place, basically within minutes, you had, profound misinformation going around. You had thousands of, there was a study just in the last couple of days showing there were at least 140,000 posts on X, Twitter, falsely claiming the attacker was either Jewish or Muslim that were viewed millions of times. Those were picked up in Britain and then regurgitated by commentators and political analysts who had their own kind of political cause to try and follow. So it is a case study for me in the dangers of Twitter X as a real-time news aggregator in the Musk era, for which it has become extremely damaging.
Yeah, the conspiracy theories were mainly around what had happened actually a couple of days earlier at the Bondi shopping centre, where 6 people had been killed, and there was a kind of mass conspiracy theory that was got going by some Russian blogger he's Australian of Russian heritage, who has taken refuge in the Russian embassy in Australia. And we now know it was this kind of 40-year-old misogynist from Queensland, I think, who kind of was just a right old weirdo who did it. And yet that stuff is allowed to proliferate. But you look at what Musk says. He says our concern is that if any country is allowed to censor content for all countries, which is what the Australian, and he calls her e-safety commissar, is demanding, then what's to stop any country from controlling the entire internet? And so he is kind of saying, look, this is the slippery slope. If we allow the Australians to do this, then every country around the world will be trying to do it. And so this is a bigger fight than just about what people see in Australia.
Yeah, and I think it's also possibly naive to think that this is Musk ideology, the ultra free speech. This is about power, and this is about commercial interests, and this is about who fundamentally wins. And I think Musk knows that other nations are watching this closely. Australia, probably more often than we realise, is at the forefront of quite big social change, right? You're nodding. I mean, you know Australia kind of better than any of us here, but they were the ones who introduced plain packaging for tobacco, right? Which, when you think back to it now, seems absolutely obvious, right? And the whole world has copied that. That will have been a massive hole in tobacco companies' pockets when that was first mooted. And Australia just went, yeah, bugger them, we're going to do it. Now, if Australia gets its way, then that is actually going to hit the pockets, not just of Musk, but of, Meta, or of whoever decides that their platform is no longer a platform, it is being editorially controlled.
Well, this isn't their first battle with the social media companies. If you go back to 2021, and it was a very different government then, it was the government of Scott Morrison, who was kind of right populist, who kind of became very unpopular in the end. There was the huge battle fought with Facebook, when the Australian government was saying, you're going to have to pay news providers to lift their content and put it onto Facebook, and Facebook banned Australians from seeing Facebook for a while. Because it was again another showdown between these mighty pan-national tech companies that have got phenomenal financial firepower against small governments who say, well, hang on, we're just trying to protect our local news organisations. That was what happened then. And now trying to uphold law and order in Australia and they're finding it very, very difficult indeed against these mighty corporations.
So I think this is a sort of opening skirmish in the battle between states, and particularly Western states of a liberal democratic bent who are looking to try and shore up their democracy, and companies like Musk. This is, I mean, it's, to some extent it's been going on for a long time. But as sites like Twitter and X, or as the technology continues to progress and AI and deepfakes become a bigger and bigger element, this is a battle that many politicians have wanted to duck because they don't want to take on Meta, or they don't want to take on Twitter, or frankly many of them just don't know how, because it does require collective action, because Musk and all of these people have on their side that it is hard to regulate the internet. Musk is saying, oh, this will mean that the internet is going to end up being regulated or policed. Well, quite frankly, a lot of people would welcome it, in the sense that, as we know, for the last 30 years, or basically since its inception, it has more or less been a wild west. It has been something that has escaped global regulation because it is impossible or very difficult to do. But it is a conversation that Western policymakers and politicians are going to have, because if these sites are going to remain in any sense sort of part of the public sphere, particularly during elections, and deepfakes and AI and all of these things continue to proliferate, we're going to have to do something, because it cannot just be, again, this sort of state of nature situation where you just sort of believe where you want to believe, because if that happens, then it is basically impossible to have a public square, and therefore it is impossible to have democracy, because you can't have democracy when you can't trust what you see.
I think that's absolutely right. I think regulation is inevitable, and it is a sign of maturity of any invention. You know, the first motor car probably didn't have speed limits, right? We didn't have to have a highway code in the sort of 1920s as such. The idea that you will never regulate the internet is, quite frankly, for the birds.
All markets are regulated.
Of course you are. Every market is regulated. And, you know, I am not a fan of the old slippery slope argument. But imagine that we never put the brake on showing violent images, right? Is there anything that stops Twitter from just becoming, you know, apart from your deepfakes, a site for complete pornography, a site for snuff movies? Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I guess the question is, you cannot regulate how people share this stuff. So if it's on, it's on.
Look,
and if it's off, then that's the only guarantee you've got.
We are talking about what has happened in Australia 10,000 miles away. Let's bring it closer to home. And the deep fake audio that was produced of Sadiq Khan around the time of Remembrance Sunday, which is him saying, you know, he wanted it to be a 1 million man march in London, pro-Palestinians, and the Metropolitan Police will do what I tell them to do because I'm the boss. And it sounded just like Sadiq Khan. It was totally a fake. It ricochets around kind of Twitter and the internet at kind of unbelievable velocity.
But that's a harder argument, actually.
What the point I'm making is that a lot of the social media companies have tried very hard to regulate, and they have got people who kind of intervene to try and take down fake stuff and take it down fast, because they know the damage that this can do, and that there are bad actors out there, China, Russia, who want to sow discontent.
So bear with me.
And Twitter has kind of, you know, abandoned all of that.
So what happens, right, if this video of the church that gets taken down and somebody contrives to put up content that is absolutely fake, that is not real, but that shows this kind of level of violence? I mean, do you see what I mean? I don't know then what you're regulating. Are you regulating the actual video, the actual images themselves, or are you regulating anyone copying that?
Well, I suppose you should break it down, right? So there's an interesting, just to take the sort of violence element, just to start with, it's interesting, right? Because we've all worked in TV news where actually we wouldn't show that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or
no, we know. We have rules about showing bodies. We all
know that there is a very strict set of rules within British broadcasting about kind of the level of how graphic the images you will be. And if you are in a particularly, like you're in a terrorist attack or in a war zone or whatever, you will have really horrible pictures that the camera crew will have picked up. But you don't
have warnings if you get anywhere close to showing disturbing images.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So we're going from that world, which is the world that basically until quite recently has still been omnipresent and dominant, to a world where already you can basically see any of this stuff. And indeed, Gaza has been a great example, right? Gaza, the internet right now, you go on it, people will have seen it. Within 30 seconds, you will find the most graphic images. And there is a question about, maybe some of those rules, I always thought to some extent, were rather too strict on British broadcasting, because sometimes I felt that there was occasionally a kind of slightly infantilizing kind of level of kind of what people could and shouldn't see. But clearly going to a kind of no rules whatsoever, or a world where you've got someone like Musk who is completely unbothered, and Meta as well. Meta's exactly the same. Instagram's full of those Gaza images, or TikTok. Then that is a completely different world, and is one that we haven't even really started to think about or considered.
I mean, the infantilizing point is interesting. I would have said it was sanitizing. I mean, what and I've been there when you've got footage which is horrific, and what we tend to do in war coverage on the conventional news media is you show what happens when a shell is fired. You see the rocket coming out of the rocket launcher. You don't see what happened when it lands on a pile of human bodies. And we don't show that. And so we end up sanitizing the kind of drama and the horror of what war is. And I think that is a very valid point. But I do think that, with falsehood, if we are not going to stand up and say, this cannot stand, then we risk undermining our democracy, because people have no idea what to believe, and there have to be sources. I mean, we may be fighting a losing battle, but by God, we've got to have the fight.
But you don't always know it. That's my point. I mean, we know you don't always recognise falsehood.
Yes.
Your example of how quickly that spread about the the immigrant or the Jewish guy who was the perpetrator in Sydney is a classic example.
But that's why you need content moderators to be doing their job on social media.
Or you had what you used to have with Twitter, right? Which is where you had a proper, robust verification system, and people could, at least with the blue tick, know, of course, those people could make mistakes and would make mistakes, but if they did, then the expectation would be that you correct it. And I do wonder whether, I mean, if Musk's vision of Twitter sort of continues and he keeps hold of the company, I do think actually newsrooms and reputable news organisations probably do have to have like deep thinking about whether being on Twitter or X, whether the balance has actually tipped to the point when we are giving the site a credibility that it no longer deserves. I mean, there was always a conversation, we've all been part of it in newsrooms, about kind of how much you use social media and what the drawbacks are, but I always felt strongly that the pros always outweighed the minuses, because it was, for all of its faults, it was a sort of real-time information thing that people used and people found useful, and it was usually accurate and you contributed to that. In the Musk world, I don't think that's true anymore.
You've got no idea.
You've got no idea, and whether we are just, and whether, I mean, one would hope or had hoped that maybe a rival would come along and take its place. That hasn't happened so far.
Can I just ask a question? Okay, so my Twitter feed, X feed, is full of these amazing little nature videos now. And they are so sweet, right? But I've got no idea if they've been like AI'd or they've got little dancing pandas and people like monkeys hugging each other. I mean, it's my dream site at the moment. I absolutely love it. But
sounds like the Musk world is perfect for Maitlis.
It's perfect. But I don't even know whether to believe the nature videos now.
There
I've got to that point. I'm so sceptical of whatever I'm seeing.
We need, at some point,
Do monkeys hug each other?
Where's Attenborough where you need him?
I know.
We, at some point, in order for our democracy to function, we are going to need an online news site aggregator, something that people come together, that people can have confidence and trust in. And if we don't have that, then it's lost. And the one thing I'm surprised about so far is that no competitor has emerged to try and displace it. And everything we've said about Twitter, we'll be putting stuff on from this show on Twitter later. So because there's still nothing else.
Because if we don't do that, then we are surrendering a space to even more of the fantasists, but to the fakers.
We don't even have a regulator of social media yet. I mean, you can say what you like about Ofcom, but we kind of know the remit of the job, right? We know where it operates. I don't think
Ofcom does have some regulatory function over social media.
Ofcom has regulatory function. Yes,
it has a regulatory function. But it's pretty weak and is still, as we know, with
in its infancy, maybe.
And they don't quite know how to handle it.
Funnily enough, I was speaking to one of the Ofcom lawyers who's dealing with this stuff, and mainly dealing with trying to keep pornography off these sites, off the social media sites at the moment. I mean, how many lawyers does Ofcom have against how many millions of videos are being uploaded? Every kind of 5 minutes.
Sometime, if you ever want a bit of a laugh when you're thinking about the people who are going to take on these companies, have a look on a civil service website and see the amount of money that people who are the regulators in this space will be getting paid, and then you compare it to the sort of money that
Elon
Silicon
Musk.
Valley
So
and the sort of
29p,
people,
isn't it?
the disparities will be absolutely enormous. The capacity of the British state, and frankly, any state, maybe not the Americans, but certainly in Europe, to actually, now we're outside the EU in particular, because the EU has been more robust on this stuff collectively, but Britain in particular finds itself especially exposed in terms of the state capacity to be able to take on these companies and to know how to do it, frankly, just technologically more than anything else. It is David and Goliath.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, a child is understood to be among 5 people who have died following a failed attempt to cross the Channel. The government's flagship Rwanda policy passed through Parliament in the early hours after a showdown with peers came to an end.
It's the weird conjunction of events, isn't it? That on the one hand, you have Rishi Sunak sort of just after midnight last night celebrating victory in getting the legislation through the House of Commons and the Lords, and you think, right, okay, what happens now? When do the planes take off? And as we discussed yesterday, still quite a way away. And then today, the reality of the Channel and the small boats and more people drowning. And I'm sure if you're Rishi Sunak, you say, well, that is why we need to solve the problem. And I'm sure if you're a skeptic, you say, this is not going to stop the small boats. There is no evidence to say that this is going to act as a deterrent, and this is going to go on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, this is a horrific human tragedy, first and foremost, which is that 5 people, including a child, have died in the Channel. And the reasons for that are actually pretty obvious and pretty simple, that the conditions for travelling were good. It's not windy at the moment, it's not stormy, the seas are calm, and the traffickers have tried to pile way too many people onto the boats. Not that they should be taking anyone, but in this case there were 112 people on board what we think of being a single dinghy, and it got grounded on a sandbank. It was being relaunched when people lost their lives. And I think the mistake in a way that we make is to try and connect that to what we know happened in the Commons and in the Lords, in Parliament overnight, as if somehow these people were thinking, oh, the legislation's done, can we risk it? I think we are kidding ourselves if we think that people in that state of absolutely dire need are watching and understanding the various amendments going on within our Parliament. They're not. There is very little research to suggest that refugees consider the migration policies of their destination when they're choosing where to move, because most of the time they're not following the current asylum policies or even the economic conditions of their destination country. They are seeing pictures, they're being messaged, WhatsApped by relatives, and their understanding of Britain being a place of welcome or a place of greater opportunity is first and foremost in their lives.
The other thing is the extent to which these deaths on the Channel have become normalised. I remember only when we, at Newsnight, we happened to be doing a special on that day in November 2021 when nearly 30 people drowned, and it was massive news, and okay, there were more people, including children, then, but it's happened sort of been part of the punctuation of the news, sort of on and off every couple of months, maybe less. You have at least one person, 2 people. By the way, there are probably many more as well, because there are bodies, as anyone, if you speak to the Coast Guard, will tell you, that are never found, or if they are found, they're found years later. I remember going to a vigil reporting for Newsnight on it, on all of the numbers who had been, or the numbers of bodies that had been found. Someone had made a mural of it, and so many of them were just marked with a number next to them with X, because no one ever knows their name. Don't know where they came from, don't know what their story was, and we'll never know. I mean, the Rwanda policy, obviously there is this weird sort of synergy of these events, and the thing is that I think, there is a case that with the world on the move, a process which is only accelerating, there may well be a case, a stronger case in time, for some form of offshore processing. It is something that more countries are doing in Europe, or at least investigating, because the capacity to absorb the numbers is so limited. And indeed there is an EU project to try and sort of have quotas and share numbers and so on, to try and deal with the numbers who are coming, because it is very, very substantial. But as you say, Emily, I think we are truly, truly kidding ourselves if we believe that Rwanda is going to make a substantial difference one way or the other, because it was always seemed to me to have been devised by a group of people who have never spoken to anyone who are trying to cross. And that is because if you actually spend 30 minutes speaking to these people, they will tell you that the channel itself, where they know there is a risk of death, is not a deterrent. Now, if the channel itself and the risk of death is not a deterrent, the prospect of some of them being sent to Rwanda, a country about which they will know little, is even less of a deterrent. They view all of this stuff, you talk to them again and again, they view it, and whether you think they're genuine refugees or not, and some are and some aren't, but whatever you think, they have rolled the dice. They've rolled the dice again and again and again to get to where they're going. It's been sometimes they've travelled thousands and thousands of miles by foot, by plane, by bus, getting on the back of a car, all sorts of unlikely stuff. And it is so unlikely that they've even got to Calais. So just a couple more rolls of the dice. Will I get over? Will I die? Will I not? Will I get sent to Rwanda? It's another roll of the dice. And sometimes they even think, as we've talked about on the show before, because many are religious, they think that they're being guided by God and providence. And then with you got that on your side, honestly, James Cleverly or Suella Braverman or a flight to Rwanda, it's nothing.
The other thing about it is that I was kind of reading about how the government is trying to inform people in the camps that this is the new government policy. And if you have come from Afghanistan, Syria, North Africa, the Sahel, or you've come from Vietnam, and you've got as far as Calais, and there's 25 miles between you...
There's nothing.
You think, I'm nearly there.
You can see it.
You can see it. And also, the other point about it is, and, I'm sure you've done a lot more of this, Lewis, than I have recently, but, 20 plus years ago when I was in Paris, it was people stowing aboard lorries to try and get over from Calais into the Channel Tunnel and into Britain that way, and that route has been closed down because of better technology, and so they try other routes. But these are people who have got odd bits of family who've already made it to Britain.
Yes, that's usually why they're coming. Yeah.
And usually the reason they're coming is not because they believe the streets of London are paved with gold. It is believed because they have already got family members there, and there is a sense that there is a bit of infrastructure that they can kind of merge into very quickly with their family groups.
I think it's perfectly legitimate for our government to say too many people are on the move trying to come to this island.
Quite right.
We get that. And I think it is perfectly legitimate to say it is abhorrent what is going on with the trafficking gangs, and they are the people responsible for the death of so many. I think what isn't clear is why they're not targeting the gangs themselves first and foremost. If you are working on a global level, if you are able to catch criminals globally or go after terrorists globally, I don't understand why you wouldn't put these enormous sums of money, I mean hundreds of millions of pounds, into smashing the gangs to make it a deterrent for the gangs rather than for the people themselves. The other thing I'd say, and presumably this is the kind of biggest irony of all, is that if you want to prevent people from coming to this island, then you do something that puts border controls outside of the UK, which is exactly what we did. We moved our border controls to France in 2000, in those sort of early years. It reduced asylum applications to, I think, 28,000 when at its lowest in 2006. And weirdly, until 2015, we didn't see a big rise in asylum seekers, not in numbers, because our border controls were in France. If you want to try and solve this question, you need to work with your allies. And of course, ironically, that's kind of what we stopped doing after 2016. Every time Rishi Sunak hails Albania as a success, he's absolutely right. He's 100% right that he massively reduced the numbers of Albanians coming. Why? Because he opened up talks, negotiations. It was that simple. You make sure you have a dialogue between the place they're leaving and the place they're coming. We don't have that at the moment.
Well,
properly.
I suppose the government would say that they are trying to crack down on the gangs, and they have invested money. Obviously, they could invest the Rwanda money as well. And it is fair to say as well that it's not like it's the British government that uniquely has got a problem with it. The French government's got a problem with it. The Italian government, the EU. It's really hard. It's just really, really hard. These organisations are extremely sophisticated. They're extremely good at what they do. Their currency is people, and it's a bit like, in a way, you can make an equivalent to the war on drugs. States have struggled, self-evidently, to control the gangs and the cartels that are producing and bringing in drugs into Europe, into North America every
But we
week.
don't lock up drug users. I
No,
mean,
we
not
don't.
in the same way.
No,
This is the equivalent. We don't send drug users to prison. We send the criminal gangs behind the drugs to prison in a perfect world. You know, if you think at source the problem is the gangs,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you just put all yours? And you're right. You know, it is maybe the same as drug gangs, but that's got a different response to it.
It's not. The truth is, I mean, the truth is the Rwanda policy, right? Is that, as we know, it is
It's
not
performative.
sexy. It's not. Rwanda policy is the cracking down on the gangs and doing the sort of hard yards, which actually the Home Office is trying to do. Border Force is trying to do, but it's not sexy. It's not something to give to the Sun and the Mail when you are under such profound political pressure from the right. And so Rwanda always was a political response. It was never a policy response. And of course, if this government were looking at another 5 years in office, if it had just been returned to office, they would end up with a significant political problem because it would be exposed as to have making little difference quite quickly. But of course, as we know, it's basically sort of there. You know, we're not going to have anything take off if we do have it for 10 to 12 weeks, by which time we'll be staring down an election anyway.
And just one other thing. I mean, let us imagine for a moment that the people who are in Calais or wherever they are along the north coast of France are really studying the government proposals for the Rwanda policy. And they've figured out that maybe 300 people a year are going to go to Rwanda.
1% if they're lucky.
It's a tiny percentage.
Even if it were 10%.
Even if it was 10%,
20.
I've got a 9 in 10 chance of surviving making it in Britain. I'm still going for it.
And when we went in last August for this show, for Investigates, that was exactly what people said. Some people were aware of it. They were aware of it because they hear it from the smugglers, and they hear it and they chat about it and so on. And the smugglers tell them, we had the clip of it, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. Nearly everybody will stay. And as you say, John, even if it's, it's 1%, but even if it were 10%, 20%, 30%, unless you're sending literally everybody or nearly everybody, there will be very little deterrent effect, and it simply would not be possible to nearly send everybody or get anything close to it.
What moments in my life have I felt proud to be English? There are personal moments. Family holiday with my parents in the Lake District, when we finally reached the peak of Scarfell Pike. Belting out 3 lions in the crowd at Wembley in '96. Being the first person in my family to go to university. Defending people facing the death penalty in countries that look up to our rule of law. And moments as Labour's leader, meeting people in towns, villages and cities around our country from every background and circumstance, who all share the same sense of decency, honour and fairness. It's a daily reminder of what the Labour Party is and who it serves. From establishing NATO to creating the NHS, Labour is at its best when it has celebrated, defended and served the values of our country and its people. For me, this is what real patriotism is about, serving the country we love. Today, on St George's Day, we come together to celebrate our shared history. Today is about respect for those who sacrificed so much for us to have the freedoms and the rights that we enjoy today. Respect for those who keep the country going, and respect for each other. The symbol of St George, the St George's flag, belongs to every person who loves this country and seeks to make it better. A symbol of pride, celebration, belonging and inclusion. So on behalf of the Labour Party, I wish everyone a happy St George's Day. Let us be proud of our national identity, confident on the world stage and sure of our country's future.
That was Sir Keir Starmer, and today is St George's Day. And I don't think that was so much Labour trying to wrap itself in the flag, the English flag I should hasten to add, so much as saying, actually, you know what? It's not just kind of football fans being leery or far-right politicians who can be proud of being English. And kind of if patriotism means anything, it doesn't mean that you have to shout very loudly about it. You can all be quietly patriotic, can't you?
I do think it was a bit try-hard. I'm sorry, the rousing music.
What, Scafell Pike?
And I'm on holiday in the Lake District, and isn't it wonderful? I mean, surely it's just allowing everyone to sort of think about their own identity in their own way, if they even want to pay particular lip service to one day of the year. I think what I heard in that was Keir Starmer saying, I am not Jeremy Corbyn. I promise you, I love the national anthem. I love England. I love our country. And it's a bit like when he talks about defence spending. Don't think I'm not pro-nuclear. I love nuclear. I love defence. I found it all a bit sort of like...
You sound like one of my LBC callers.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very proud.
She probably is. Now you've rumbled her.
Yeah.
What do I normally call
I
her?
love them all, by the way.
No, I don't know. I don't need to hear our politicians do that, honestly.
But in a way, though, I mean, what Starmer does there, it kind of neatly illustrates the problem that politicians, or English politicians, have with talking about England and Englishness as a cultural identity, right? Because he's sort of talking about the things that made him proud to be English, and okay, there's the kind of smaller stuff about going on holiday in the Lake District and so on. But then he's talking about sort of big things, right? About kind of like the creation of NATO and the Labour Party's sort of interaction with that, which actually a lot of that stuff obviously is eliding, and this is always the problem with Englishness when people are talking about it, is the elision between Englishness and Britishness, which has basically been one and the same thing since the 19th century, which isn't true in other parts of the UK, which have retained their distinct, Scottishness or Welshness and so on. So it's sort of hard because England doesn't have its own political institutions, and even apart from things like the England football team, its own cultural institutions, and so that's just hard for politicians.
This is not a sort of like, don't try and be English. For me, it sounded like just one cornetto. I don't want to hear Italian politicians doing it. I don't like to hear American politicians doing it. I think you show rather than tell.
Yeah. Okay. But I kind of think that there was something to learn from America and patriotism, and always being, next to the flag, and you fly the flag much more than you do in Britain, where we've kind of got
a bit of post-colonial... You love people who put patriot in their bio, don't you?
Yeah, we've got a bit of post-colonial guilt, I think, about being British, and so what happens then is that certain groups who like to shout loudest about it,
or drape themselves in the flag,
and therefore, Lee Anderson has put out a video today as well, where he's kind of saying, well, I bet if you're a Guardian reading, avocado eating, vegan or whatever, you'll be hating me celebrating St George.
Shall we hear from our very own St George, Lee Anderson?
Look at these here, look. Flag of St George. It's St George's Day today, and this country of ours has been a gift to the world. Look at the Industrial Revolution. Culture, arts, music, sports, everywhere you look on this planet, you see some of that. Oh, by the way, happy birthday, William Shakespeare.
A big happy birthday to the big Bill. The big Bill in the sky.
Richard Tice did it in a different way. He said, Happy St George's Day, and he's got this lovely flag. And Henry Morris on Twitter underneath him has said, why have you messed with the flag and made it pink? Are you woke?
Other countries, to go back to Liam, other countries don't have music or culture, of course, famously.
No, they don't.
They don't. No,
we've always, and our music is always renowned around the world.
See, that's typical of you lot. You're just liberal avocado.
No,
cynics.
I hate avocado. Yeah, but I think, John, your point is right. Progressives, or the liberal left in particular, are fundamentally uncomfortable talking about Englishness. This is not a new phenomenon. That has been the case. Orwell wrote about it, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's been going on for a very long time. And therefore, there is a different history of England to be told, where everyone's always like, England's a really conservative country, capital C, small c. There's a very different history of England to be told, but no one ever tells it, because the people who would tell that story are afraid to do so, or feel uncomfortable about doing so.
You show your pride. We know we have some of the best music scenes, right, in the world. You have some of the best designers in the world. You have some of the best... I was going to say food, and actually I will say food. I think, British restaurants now are amazing. You don't always need to kind of remind everyone.
Well, it's very un-English. It's very un-English to be very showy. Right. That's the thing I think most of when I hear from Anderson, actually, is that most people... One of the best things about Britain or England or whatever is that actually it is a very self-effacing country, right? It's a country that doesn't like to big itself up.
That's British.
All the time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So
can't that self-effacement be part of our national character?
And it is.
Do you remember we used to have like those books that were like called Britain's towns?
Yeah,
right?
And people love that stuff.
And people loved it, and it was funny. And
it is funny.
If my town was in the I would kind of, I came from Sheffield, which is an amazing city, but there are bits of it that we happily recognise as a bit and yet that all kind of changed with the sort of populist narrative that you had to... Do you remember when our cabinet had to have like bigger and bigger flags behind them? Why do we need that?
Well, but I think you have to reclaim it. That the only true patriot is the one who drapes himself in the flag, wears Union Jack or St George... St George cufflinks, and anyone else is somehow kind of some ghastly internationalist who loves nowhere better than Britain.
Well, we don't. Well, the thing is that we don't like, as a sort of generally speaking, in terms of national character, we don't like earnestness, right? The whole if there is one thing genuinely that I think that is kind of distinctive, distinctive about Little Britain, right? There is a sense of humour which is basically, enjoys taking the piss out of others and ourselves, right? And that is the one thing that many of these people, including Anderson, including like the Daily Mail, which sets itself up as a kind of arbiter of English. I mean, John Cleese saying this. Exactly. John Cleese always said is that this is a paper which claims to be this kind of sort of essence of Britishness, and you will not find a single gag, a single joke inside. Its MO, its fundamental reflexes, everything is shit. Everybody who doesn't like anything we like is also shit. That is a deeply un-English and un-British thing.
You're right.
The polling, by the way, some polling out from our friends at More in Common, saying, which of the following, in your view, do you think best defines Englishness? What do you think the top three were?
Tea.
Drinking tea's two.
Yorkshire pudding.
Yorkshire pudding not on the list, John.
Oh,
in fact, no. Humour. Nope. No, very humorless people on this list.
Irony. No. No.
Hardly knew her.
Do you know, I have to say that polling could have gone either way, because we know it's
the England
also...
football team.
Football is
Football
sixth.
Ah.
Amazed you two haven't. You two haven't said this with your frequent trips to the palace.
The royal family.
The monarchy. Yeah, exactly. And then third, the weather.
The royal agents.
And then fourth, going to the pub. Yeah. So there you go.
Look, polling, to be frank, could have gone either way, because it is also, as we know, the presidential elections in North Macedonia, and I thought you just whipped out your phone to tell us the latest results there.
What, in North Macedonia?
Yeah,
well, we will be following it closely overnight.
Yeah.
People and North Macedonian listeners will
That's
be...
for our editor, Tom. He's very, very invested in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, look...
How un-British
Tom just said to us, our editor, could you do 2 minutes on this?
What, on the North Macedonian presidential election?
No, on the whole business of... St George's Day.
Well, we'd certainly like to send our good wishes to Stevo Pendragovsky and Gordana Silanowska, who are the two leading candidates for the presidential election. And of course, we should say that the full list of candidates will be available on Wikipedia.
On our
website.
Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.